Protesting is sexy. First, let's start with the No King's Day protests. I think the No King's Day protests were in response to Trump in general and what they deem as his authoritarian actions, and they just so happen to coincide with the fact that protests had picked up, the past couple of days this week in response to the ICE raids. Though Trump himself, he has said that he's going to kind of pull back from the raids because it's hurting agriculture, restaurant industry, various industries. So he's going to kind of pull back on that a little bit. So, whatever. I disagree with many that deemed them successful simply because the streets were packed in some cities. I think that's a weird way to judge whether or not a protest was successful. I don't view these protests as having really any impact. I don't think Trump, the way that he governs, is going to change much at all. And it shouldn't. He won the presidency. It's only like 6 months into his presidency, which, when you think about it, is kind of wild. One problem that I think this country has really is we like symbolic representation and symbolic action over the things you need to do to actually have change. You have to be engaged in voting if you want to have any type of change in like laws and governing. You have to vote. You have to know who you're voting for, right? Many of us, we go and we vote for politicians because they have a D next to their name or because they have an R next to their name. We don't really, look into their policies, how they voted in the past, how they are most likely to vote in the future. We don't do any of that. And, a part of that is just kind of the function, like the way that life functions, to a certain extent. You have a family, you have a job, you have certain things. It's very hard to kind of stay on top of the news the way you need to stay on top of the news to really kind of get a grasp on, okay, what's actually happening. For example, the big, beautiful bill. Most people haven't actually looked into the bill and read the actual bill, right? You kind of read what, whatever news program that you watch says it's in the bill, but they're going to highlight certain parts in the bill and they're going to not speak about other parts in the bill. And who knows which parts of the big, beautiful bill you actually would care about if you knew what was in the bill. If you actually read the bill, you could decide for yourself, you know what? I like these parts of the bill. I don't like these parts of the bill, right? Like, this is kind of how, at least from my vantage point, you actually become an informed voter. You have to inform yourself. You can't rely on Fox News. You can't rely on MSNBC. You can't rely on CNN. You can't rely on these various platforms to kind of know what you want or have your best interest in heart. You have to have your best interest in heart, if you're asking me, right? So I think that's definitely a problem. So again, most people don't know who they're voting for and why, right? You have to be engaged civically. You have to follow through while they're in office, right? Too many times we vote somebody in, right? For example, the presidency, right? We vote for the president, they get in or they don't get in. We don't come back around until 4 years later. If the person that you wanted to win the presidency actually gets in and they're in office, you should be following along, seeing, okay, how did this person, actually preside, right? What bills did they sign? What executive actions or orders did they implement, right? You should be following along because, especially if it's their first term, because when they're running for re-election, you need to be able to say, okay, how did their first term go? Was it a case of them doing something and not doing something, or did they for some reason not have the right people in Congress, the House or the Senate, or the Supreme Court block certain things, right? Like, we have to be politically engaged, and too many of us were not engaged because it's not sexy. Being an informed voter, being intentional about how you vote, how you engage civically is not sexy. Protesting is sexy. You go out there, you feel good, you get to chant and march with people, right? There's a communal element to it. So you feel really engaged. It's not a shock that people enjoy protesting, especially these days where the stakes are not as high, right? Like, we're not in a place where, back in the founding of this country when they were protesting or, committing vandalism of property, there's the threat of a military pushback the civil rights protests where, having hoses sprayed on you or being sick by dogs, right? You were putting your body on the line. The cost of protesting now is not nearly as high, thanks to the successes of previous generations, and on top of the fact that everyone has a smartphone, which means that everyone has a camera. So, officers and whatnot, they are a lot more worried about how they're perceived, about how their profession is perceived, about how their various departments across the country are perceived. So actions are different today because it's hard to do things in the shadows. Almost everything that you do will be, put on some type of news program or news station. So you have to act accordingly. So until the people that were out there marching in the No Kings protests begin to really take a serious look at how they are engaging with politics on a day to day, I'm afraid that things aren't going to change as much as they would like things to change. Because that's where change happens. It happens by yourself. It happens when you are alone and you decide, you know what, I want to read the actual legislative bill over watching another show on Netflix or another program on Hulu or playing a video game for another hour, right? And I'm not just talking to you or about you guys. I'm talking about me. I'm talking to me too. Again, I've been trying to do a lot more reading this year because last year, I like to kind of take a mental tally of, how many books I read. I was embarrassed at how little reading I did last year. Yeah, I read articles and things of that nature, and right. So like, I read things, but as far as reading books, I was embarrassed. I could count on like two hands how many books I read last year, probably even one hand, which was very embarrassing. And so this year, I got up to like a hot start, and I'm trying to kind of stay on top of myself to know you got to read, you got to read, you got to read, because that's how you actually, for me, gain knowledge, right? And so, I'm trying to read more about the U.S. history. I'm, the founders and kind of, what did Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington and James Madison and these various gentlemen, what did they intend the Constitution to actually do? What was the climate around it, right? Because we read the documents, but really, like, what were they intending? Like, what was happening? How were they feeling? And so I'm trying to read more, and so I have to, read actual bills instead of reading articles about the bills. I have to go and go on the White House website and actually read, certain things, right? Reading news sources that I'm not that familiar with, right? We all have to kind of engage with politics differently if we want to actually have the change that we want. Don't just fall uh, prey to the sexy. Protesting is sexy. I got you, but it's not really what we need. We need to be engaged politically, and that starts when no one is around, when it's just you and your phone, your laptop, like I'm using right now to do this live stream. Whatever you have to do, that's where these things have to start. Where we engage and we take responsibility for becoming more informed people that vote and engage with the political process. So that's how I feel about the people protesting in the No Kings Day protest yesterday, right?